On episode 673 of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Tom Mouland, aka Tom the Trainer, and discuss how to optimize your physique over 40. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/672. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness Podcast is here for you. Each week, we dive deep into health and fitness topics that affect those of us over 40. I'm Coach Allen. I'm an NASM certified personal trainer with specializations in corrective exercise, behavior change, performance enhancement, and fitness nutrition. A Precision Nutrition Level 1 coach, a FAI certified functional age-linked specialist, and an OTA Level 2 online trainer. Each week, I'm joined by our co-host, Coach Rachel. She is an NASM certified personal trainer and a RRCA Level 1 run coach. Let us be your coaches as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. Hey, Ras. How you doing?
Good, Alan. How are you?
Yeah. All right. So again, we're recording some of these in advance, and so yeah, we were just on a few minutes ago. So nothing's really changed in our world since the last time we did this. But just wanted to let you know that yeah, we are recording ahead. So this episode's due to go live December 17th. But this week we're recording this is the week before Thanksgiving. So we'll be taking Thanksgiving week off, and then coming back, and then a couple weeks off around Christmas and New Year, which is why we wanted to get a few episodes ahead so we can enjoy our time off, but you don't miss an episode. So
Yay.
You ready to talk to Tom the Trainer?
Sure.
Our guest today learned the value of training as a young man, but it wasn't until a serious back injury that he got the education he needed to resolve his own pain. He became one of the top trainers at one of the largest fitness businesses in Canada. He also coaches online and hosts the podcast called Tom the Trainer Fitness. With no further ado, here's Tom Mouland. Tom, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Thanks, Alan. Thanks so much for having me on. I'm really looking forward to this interview and sharing some of my methodology with you. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is that, well, you're a little bit younger than me, but you're still over 40. And so you're in that midst of dealing with a lot of the things that some of us as we get older deal with. You know, it's like maybe we've lost the weight, we feel better about ourselves, but you know we're not where we saw ourselves. You know, we have this vision in our head. It's like when I lose that weight, this is what I'm going to look like. You know, and often it's what I look like when I was in my 20s or what I thought I should look like in my 20s, particularly if we were already overweight. And so people go into this and they're like, okay, so now I want to train to look younger, feel younger. And, you know, every once in a while, someone actually look at me and say, hey, you know, because, you know, younger people, I've talked to a lot of people and they think that that's kind of a vanity thing, that we don't have vanity when we get over 40. And I'm here to tell you that, well, I do. So I'm pretty sure practically everybody does want to look a little bit more sexy, feel a little bit better in their clothes. And yeah, when they take off their shirt, for someone to say, man, I hope I look like that when I'm your age, you know, those kind of things. So, and you are someone that's very physically fit, very strong, and you show it. I mean, you've got a great physique, particularly for someone over the age of 40. So that's what I wanted to have you here for. So kind of talk about, for someone who kind of gets to that point, particularly if they had to lose some weight, they've been lifting long enough to kind of know what they're doing, but they don't know how they're going to take that next step because they're thinking, I don't really want to be a bodybuilder with tons of muscle. Which is also very hard to do when you're over 40. But if someone wants to start getting into this, what would you tell them as far as how to structure this and start thinking about this? Because it's a different mindset to lifting than they had when they were lifting to add muscle and strength when they were losing weight. Can you kind of start that conversation for us?
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. So I think like a big part of like what I like to do is I work with a lot of men and women over 40 years old who are fairly experienced in the gym and they're looking to get to that next level, right? So it's very on par with what I do. And I do want to just kind of address that whole like vanity thing that you mentioned just briefly is like when you walk into a room and you're noticed that you have that physique, you're someone who's recognized and you look like you lift, for example, that's a statement far beyond how your shirt fits, right? And that's a statement of like I prioritize my health, I live with integrity, I do the hard things, I do what I say I'm going to do when I say I'm going to do it, I'm reliable, all those things. So I just wanted to put that out there for people as well, right? Like it's an absolute statement to accomplish that. Especially when you get to that point where I think you can accomplish any level of success with a little bit of consistency, right? To the things, right? So if you're eating well, you're hydrating, you're sleeping, and you're training and you're working out, if you're in a caloric deficit, you're going to lose weight. And if you do that consistently, you're going to lose weight. And if you're lifting, you're going to build a little bit of muscle. And people can get to a level of success just through those things, just going to the gym and doing the things. But I think what you're referring to is getting to that next stage where it's like, I've already had that kind of transformation per se. I've changed my life, but now I want to get to that level that's like recognizable, where people look at me and they're like, that guy knows or that woman knows what's up. And they go to the gym regularly and they clearly know what they're doing because visually I can see it, right? Um, so it's right in the alley of what I like to do with people, and something that I hold a very high value is looking at a progression model in training that's a little bit more complex than your typical progressive overload. So for those who might not understand progressive overload, it's basically essentially increasing the difficulty of your workouts over time intelligently, and then also at times decreasing the difficulty of your workouts over time because you can only push the red line for so long before you get hurt per se, right? So it's increasing and decreasing the level of difficulty of your workouts, creating an adaptation. Um, but people overlook training splits. So I think a lot of people are guilty of going to the gym and running a training style or methodology, and they like it and they dig it. And I'm guilty of it myself because I like push pull legs, where I break the body into three muscle groups, categories for training. And your body adapts to the training stimulus and the stress of which you create. So what I like to do with people is I actually like to start them off where I have room for progression. I call it a runway of progression that becomes endless. Because what I like to do is apply people with full body training. I want to set them up on full body training for at least 12 weeks. And the reason why I do this is because we can really get amazing like skill acquisition at the exercises that are going to give us the best return on our time invested because we're hitting them frequently. Okay. So squats, deadlifts, rows, all of those things. I generally like to start people off with lighter weights, and then we progress to heavier weights once we've acquired the skill and accomplished at least 1,000 reps of those complex compound movement patterns. We're also working at a low intensity when we start with full body workouts because you're training more frequently and therefore your intensity of the workouts cannot be high or you're not going to be able to get into the gym the next day because you're working too close to failure for that definition of intensity. Okay. Now, it's very, very beneficial for losing body fat fast. It's very beneficial for increasing your cardiovascular health, right? And you still will build muscle in the process because what you're doing is you're creating a very frequent training dose and muscle protein synthesis, which is to try to simplify language, is our body laying down new muscle for 24 to 72 hours after we give that muscle a dose of stress, to simplify things. Okay. So we're still going to grow muscle. Now, you're going to get results over that 12-week period of time, and you're going to become better conditioned, which means you're going to be able to recover when you start increasing your intensity higher. So from there, I like to move to upper lower. So over the first 12-week period working with somebody, they're training their whole entire body every single time that they train. Their intensity level is lower than a more conventional bro split where you're training muscle parts or you're training push pull legs, and the frequency is higher. Well, now we turn a couple of dials in the other direction because now we go upper lower. The frequency is lower. Our intensity can be a little bit higher because now we're only training every other workout, half of the body, right? So we're progressing not just by reps and sets or the tempo, how fast we move while executing our exercises, but the volume per muscle group per training session. Okay.
Mm.
And then from there, we can go to push pull legs. Now we're cutting the body down into 3 groups of muscles. And we can really ramp up the intensity there because it's going to be at least 72 hours before we hit that group of muscles again. So we're increasing our progression, we're increasing our demand on the body by decreasing the area of our body trained in 12-week intervals or 16-week intervals, depending on how you like to write your programming. Um, and then you have this cyclical effect where you can literally rotate through training methodologies and training styles and use them as forms of progression. And each one of those training styles has a more specific outcome to it. Okay. Now, I also have a program that I like to run that is a hybrid model that actually progresses from full body to upper lower to push pull legs over a 12-week period and condenses the training volume per muscle group every 4 weeks, similar to how I like to do things over the course of a year. And depending on how skilled the lifter is, I might look at a hybrid training model as well that does upper lower strength and push pull legs hypertrophy or like muscle building style. But I do that with very few people just because I think, especially at our age, the the risk versus reward of lifting extremely heavy, I just don't see the value in it, you know? So I think it's something that's extremely often overlooked is that people just go in and they train the same style of training over and over and over again. And then they hit a plateau and they think, well, the only way that I can get through this plateau is eat less or train harder or increase the intensity, train more days per week, et cetera, et cetera. And especially in our 40s plus, like more is not always the answer. Sometimes different is the answer, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's something that's highly, highly overlooked in the industry. And I stand and I believe in it so much that I mean, it's what I do with my clients. We rotate through the different training splits based upon their goals and specific intervals of times. And we always start them with full body, right? And whether we progress from full body after 4 weeks or after 12 weeks, everybody generally starts off, minus a
Mm.
small percentage of people who might be really specific to wanting to build muscle that I might put on a push pull leg program. But generally, we start with everybody with full body because now it's like crawling before you're walking, before you're running kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah. So if I'm going to kind of recap this, and you can correct me if I heard any of this wrong, but what you're going to do is you want to start out kind of with what we're calling, it's called periodization. So there's going to be a
Mm-hmm.
period of time, be it 12 weeks, 8 weeks, 4 weeks, that you're going to go in. You're going to train at a certain protocol, and the initial protocol that you go in with is full body, and the perspective there is because you're working the whole body, there's less intensity on any one body part, and you're more interested in letting your body learn the exercises. So this is what I refer to, or is often referred to, as the neuromuscular connection of your brain understanding the muscle fibers it needs to fire to be able to perform the movements that you want to be able to do as a part of this program. Then, when that periodization period is over, you're now going to shift typically to a half and half. So you're going to lower body day and upper body day. This is going to allow you, you're probably going to double the number of days per week that you're training. So maybe you did 2 days, now you're going to jump up to 4 days, and there's going to be more volume on the body in each of the body parts. So the intensity of the workout for that part of the body goes up, which is important because you've already trained the muscles to be able to fire efficiently. So now this is truly about stimulating the muscle to begin to grow.
Mhm.
After a period of 4 to 12 weeks, depending on how you're running your periodizations, you likely are going to plateau with that because there's you've trained the muscles to fire. Now you've made them fire, and they're going to be at a point. So moving now to a three-way split, which is the push, the pull, and the lower body. And with push and pull, we basically are saying any movement that you're pulling towards yourself, which tends to be back and bicep,
Mhm.
versus any movement where you're pushing, which tends to be chest and tricep, and then maybe a little bit on either side with the shoulders because they do both. So you're
Yep.
mixing that in there. But because now you're more focused on more finite part of the body, the intensity on those muscles now goes up even more. And
Correct.
so you have now given those muscles additional stimulus. And in fact, a lot of times what I know is trainers will move when they move from full body to half and half, they tend to then start adding in what we call, instead of the compound movements, moving to more isolation movements. So you're adding, like when you first start, you're probably not doing bicep curls and tricep extensions and things like that. You're focused on the compound movements like the bench press, the pull downs, the rows, leg press, squats, deadlifts, those things. Versus when you start getting into putting more you're going to put more isolation on those muscles. So now you're going to see movements where, yes, you're still doing the rows, you're still doing the lat pull downs, but you're probably going to throw in some bicep curls and
Yeah.
whatnot, more isolation. And then again, the next step to the three way, then there's even more volume in there. And the muscles are going to feel another round of stimulus that's even higher. And because you've now put your body kind of through through the ringer with these particular exercises, the next set of periodizations that you would do, again being 4 weeks or 12 weeks or whatever's being programmed, you're probably going to mix up the exercises so the muscles are now being hit with a whole new round of challenges, starting again with full body. So you again, the neuromuscular connection goes, then adding some intensity by splitting and splitting, and you can effectively roll through this same periodization schedule or mix it up, or change reps, change weights, change tempo in any of these to continue progression, whether it be for mass gaining or strength. But all along, if you're managing your food, you are changing your body fat percentage. Therefore, having less body fat, you watch your physique change as your fat goes down and you become more like that physique athlete that you're after.
Exactly, exactly. Now
Okay.
there's some clarity things I think. So you made a really good point on definitely how like when you're in an upper lower, you have more time that you can allocate toward isolations, and then when you go to a push pull legs, you have even more time yet again to isolate smaller muscle groups. And I have this statement. It's like you need to earn the right to do bicep curls, calf raises,
But they're
train,
so much fun.
right? But you need to earn that right to do so. And one thing that I will give a caveat to, I guess, your interpretation of it is even though we're training full body, we're still training full body 4 to 5 days per week on a full body split. And what we're doing, so when you're writing a program or you're looking at a program, you have this kind of like trifecta of intensity, which is, we'll call it just how hard you train in this definition, frequency, how often you train, right? And then your recovery, right? Um, as well as, I guess, overall training volume. So I guess it's more looking at like a box, right? So we're in our 40s and 50s and whatnot, and we have kids usually. We've got, and even if we don't, we've got a career, we've got a house, we've got pets, we've got a commute, we got all these things. We only have so much time that we can allocate towards our fitness goals. So when we're working full body, we're still training 4 or sometimes 5 days per week. But we're really being specific with our intention on that program. And the intention of full body training is 1000% optimizing body fat reduction. Okay. Because when you get really lean, your body will super compensate. Because what happens when you get really lean is your body will view that state of leanness and that state of struggle of losing body fat as a threat to survival, just on like a very innate level. And then when you change that training style and maybe up your food a little bit, your body wants to soak that food up and lay down new tissue. It wants to lay down new muscle mass because the new muscle mass will soak up more carbohydrates and store that in the body as energy when you go to upper lower. Now, generally, upper lower I look at as a specific intention of a recompositional program quite often. Quite often. I do have a program that's pure bodybuilding that's upper lower, but generally, I look at it as a recomposition program. And then push pull legs quite is very much pure, let's build as much muscle as we possibly can, right? Now, the one program I have that I would call a pure bodybuilding muscle building program that's upper lower is 4 days per week, but the intensity is extremely high. You're training to failure and beyond. So you need to only train 4 days per week on that program in order to recover from it because we're managing all those factors that go into intelligent training, right? Yeah. And the
So
thing with this, sorry, go ahead.
no, so two core things that I want to get into is as we go through this, would men and women train differently as they go through these types of progressions, or would they generally follow the same line?
Yeah, generally men and women are going to follow the same line. Um, the only time where I would look at some specificity, like gender specific programs, is I have a program that's a full body program that has a little more booty volume, right? Because I mean, I haven't met too many guys who have come to me over the years and said, "Hey, I want you to pump up my peach and give me a big old booty,"
Hmm.
right? Um,
Yeah.
and then I have a training style that I call golden era size and strength that is a little bit more focused on what I would call would be the male dominant muscles. It's a little more arms, shoulders, traps, chest, lats, kind of that V taper look per
Yeah.
se that men would want to acquire. But when we're talking just muscle gain, fat loss, and those kinds of things, it's the same across the board, unless we're getting into specific muscle groups that we want to target based on gender preferences. Does that
Okay.
make
And
sense?
those would probably be inserted, but maybe between progressions as you go. Like, okay, we've done a 12, 12, 12, and now they've gotten to a point and they're like, okay, let's focus a little bit more on the specificity of gender and B taper or booty, depending on the set. But basically saying, okay, we've gotten to a point now we can drop this in here. And because we've, based on what you said, we've kind of we triggered the body to basically be hungry, and then once we start feeding it and we're training, now the body's trying to lay down more muscle, and we can
Mhm.
just kind of carry that forward then into one of these more specific programs.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. The specificity would come after running what I would call, I guess, like my methodology for just like an overall transformation, right? Very much so. Or really if it's just something that the client wants, right? But always after, let's run through the basics of everything that I do. And also in the way that I do them, it teaches my clients all the different training methodologies and everything I know and all the different ways to progress because I have micro progressions within my programs, which would be a whole nother episode for us to discuss. But it really empowers them to be like, well, I want to focus on building muscle now that I'm 2 years into my training transformation. I know how to do that, right? I got a little carried away with my food. I want to lean down. Well, I know how to do that, right?
Okay. So
Yeah.
the next question I had would be, okay, so there's even within the segment when we talk about 40 plus, it's so funny because when I first started training and doing all this stuff, I was in what I basically my mid 40s. I can tell you now, being in my late 50s, um, it's still ever different. It's not like we're just, okay, you're over this, this is your plug. So I would say, like for me, my recovery takes 50% more time than it did when I was in my mid 40s. So I can tell as I get older, my recovery rate is dropping.
Mhm.
So I'm having to change the way I train as I go. I still go with the intensity, the training intensity. I don't have to bring down. I can train just as hard, but I find that the recovery is where, like, for me, the magic really has to happen, because if I don't get the recovery, so how would someone know, and how would you alter the recovery if you notice that particular clients are not recovering as well as they may have when they were younger?
Yeah. So, I mean, what I like to do there, and that becomes very like intuitive with your client, and because it's very much as to like how the individual maybe necessarily is wired. So when I design my programs, I'm looking at that model of balancing all those areas of, like I said, the training intensity, the frequency, the overall volume, and the rest and the recovery. And then at times, um, not that often, but sometimes I'll just look at my check-in form with a particular client, and my check-in form is quite thorough. And what it does is it gives me indications that they need a bit of a deload that might be unplanned in the program. It happens rarely because I intelligently deload throughout my programs every
Okay,
4 weeks.
let's answer the question. What is a deload for those that don't understand what that is?
Right. So a deload is where you're decreasing the stress from training on your body, which can be done multiple ways. It can be done by taking an entire week off, which I really don't recommend for most people, because for most people, unless they've really nailed down this as a lifestyle and they are itching to get back to the gym when they're not going to the gym, then there's a likelihood that they might not come back. So there's that as an aspect. The other aspect is maybe you've been training 5 days per week and maybe you train 3 days that week, and then you lower the intensity of the workouts. You don't work as hard in the workouts. Or maybe you just cut your workouts in half. But what you're doing is you're decreasing the stress that comes from training, because there's signs showing that you're becoming overtrained and that you're not recovering from it. And those signs are generally going to be like irritability, trouble sleeping, ironically enough. You think if you're worn out that you would actually want to sleep, but trouble sleeping, as well as like you're not getting stronger in your workouts. Those things are key, right? And stress levels. You notice your stress levels are getting really, really high. That's an indication that we might need to pull back on things, um, which I have to kind of just do intuitively with my clients. And the way that I find that information out is through their check-in form that's very thorough. I think I don't even know how many questions are on it, but there's a lot.
Yeah. All right. So as we're going through this, because there. Okay, I'm not going to call him out, but he's the nicest guy in the world. But he asked me the question about, um, it's a common bodybuilder thing of bulking and cutting, and your program doesn't do that. It kind of combines the two aspects into the progressions as you go. Uh, can you talk a little bit about, okay, so we're looking at trying to gain muscle and lose fat, and yeah, there's an optimal way to do it and there's a right way to do it. um, what are your thoughts on how do we position ourselves to be doing both when all the information out there from bro science says that no, you should follow these cycles of bulk and cut?
Yeah, well, I think like with that is really going to be dependent on the individual itself, right? So, I have clients that I do put through really kind of heavy bulks, and it just depends on what they come to me for their goals. Now, if you're going to be bulking per se, I always do like to try to get people extremely lean, and then I glyco load them and I super compensate by getting them extremely lean. And I start driving food quite intensely and driving carbohydrates specifically quite intensely to the point where I've put on 20 pounds in on clients in 16 weeks um, after a pretty aggressive cut. So there is value in it, but then at the same time, like we have to balance the fact that like what is it that we're trying to get out of our lifting and our training? Are we just trying to have a better lifestyle? Are we just trying to look a little bit better? Do we want to have these intense bulking periods where, you're falling asleep with a bowl of food on your chest, like, hi, raising my hand here, I've done that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Or,
I knew one guy, and literally he would set an alarm for like 2 o'clock in the morning to have some protein because his coach told him that he had to have protein every 3 hours. And so quite literally, he never slept more than 3 hours at a shot because his coach had told him he had to eat protein every 2 to 3 hours. And so the guy would set his alarm, wake up at 2 o'clock, eat, go back to sleep, have his alarm set at 6, eat. Um, and so yeah, there's ways that you can do things, and there's ways that you can like actually have a life and do things.
yeah, for sure. And I think like honestly, like I don't know who that person is and whatever. I can talk freely because I don't know them, but like that's just really poor advice because I think we've all eaten a steak before and gotten sick and been like, oh look, there's the steak. Do you know what I mean? Like those those amino acids are still being digested and absorbed,
Yeah.
right? But whatever, to each their own if people want to give that advice. But you're especially when it comes to growth, like your sleep is so important. So why are you having somebody wake up after 3 hours of sleep to eat? Like it's
Again,
more
yeah, he
important.
told me he was doing that, and I'm like, because well, he really wanted to be a bodybuilder, so he was with this guy and said, this guy's done this. I'm like, okay, I totally get that this guy's done this, but dude, this is this is not the way, but to quote the what is it? I guess it's the Star Wars thing where they know, Mandalorian guys or whatever, like this is the way. No, this is not the way. So if someone does actually want to cut body fat and they still want to train hard, how do you coach them through that nutrition? Because a lot of times we're talking about at calorie restriction, uh, we still need the protein. We still need those amino acids, the new ones, if particularly we're going to lay new muscle. How do I go through the process of eating at an optimal rate to lose body fat and retain and grow muscle?
Mhm. So I think there's also like some false information that you quite often hear. And fortunately, us living in the information area, I think like there's more people talking about how you can lose body fat and build muscle at the same time. With that, your caloric deficit needs to be modest, right? For sure it does. You can't avoid carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are absolutely integral in building muscle, because they're going to give you energy for good lifts, right? In my opinion, I don't know of any Mr. Olympia who ate keto ever, and those guys are taking things to the extreme level. It's going to be a little bit dependent on what works for you. My methodology of nutrition, I call it the luxury lifestyle allowance, where I use a very balanced nutritional approach. Um, Very balanced protein, carbs, and fats. I'm a little higher on protein and carbs, and keep fats pretty consistent for hormonal purposes. And then what I do with my clients is I give them a refeed meal, depending on the language you want to use for it, refeed slash cheat meal. Because obviously, like, there's semantics of people in the industry who are like, well, a refeed meal is just more food of the same kind of food that you're eating in your meal plan, and a cheat meal is a food that's off plan. So I guess you would call it cheat meal if you want to be the well actually guy who's pushing on his glasses, correcting everybody with terminologies kind of thing, right? And I do that because it down regulates the hunger hormones, right? And mentally it's easier. Socially it's easier. But I like a very balanced approach with my nutrition, and I like a modest overall caloric deficit through food. And then I like for my training and activity levels to be the dials that I'm turning most often, and I'm turning the food dial least often to dictate the change that I want out of my clients, right? Um, I used to do things different than I do now. Um, but I got great results to simplify things for the listeners with a 35 30 third sorry 35 35 30 macro split. 35% of your calories coming from protein and carbohydrates, and 30% coming from fats. I do things a little bit higher carbohydrates and lower fats now, but that's a that was an approach that I did for years that got phenomenal results with hundreds of clients with to simplify things. Because I'd have to go into the weeds a little bit on my own nutritional approach because I do carb cycling now on top of calorie cycling. But that's a very intelligent way to look at it.
Okay. So, if someone's looking to get into this, what are some other things that they would want to consider with regards to physique training versus any other type of weight training or fitness training?
Hmm. Well, like when it comes to training physique, you have to understand that you're there. So I guess if I were to compare it to like performance training or powerlifting or strength training is about being extremely efficient at the movements, making those movements as easy as possible to be explosive and powerful. And there will be some correlation because if you're moving explosively, you're recruiting muscle fibers, and there will be some correlation to change there. But if you're trying to optimize your physical transformation, your physical appearance, you're generally trying to make things as hard as you possibly can, right? So you're trying to really control reps, really control tempos, and make sure that you're this language I use of catching on muscle. You need to feel your repetitions, right? You need to feel the tension of your repetitions throughout the entirety of the lift rather than trying to lift overly explosively with no control, right? And something that I like to do as well is I use stability because stability is an important thing to look at. I use stability as a form of progression. And for a listener's simple look at it is we could be on a full body program that's very much machine based for 4 weeks if we wanted to, or more machine based. And then from there we could go to barbell based. And then from there we could go to dumbbell based because we're decreasing the stability provided in each exercise. That's not internal stability that we provide ourselves. So that's something that I think is intelligent as well. And I think there comes a point in time where you do need to have stability work within your programming, even if your goal is sheer just physique change. Because when you start out, when you start out developing your ability to stabilize your joints, that's where you're running the RPMs at the red line and waiting for something to kind of break, right? Um,
So when
and
you're
this,
talking about stability, I think I just want to kind of put out there, what you're saying is that okay, if we do a lift on a machine, the machine basically forces the lift to follow a particular path, meaning no other muscles other than the prime movers are necessary in general to make the movement happen. So if I'm on a press machine, it's literally just my chest and triceps that are performing that movement. My shoulders, my core, none of the rest of it really has to engage much to allow me to do what I'm doing. So it's a very focused on those muscles. If I move to a barbell, the barbell takes away the stability because it's not following a set path, but because both hands are on the bar, they are effectively affecting each other, meaning there's less necessary engagement of other than the prime movers and some stability. When we move
Mhm.
to dumbbells, now each arm is independent. And therefore, through that movement, each arm has to independently control the movement. So, not just the prime movers, but all of the other stabilizing muscles within the arms, shoulders, core all have to hold their place. And so, by decreasing the stability, you're actually developing those stabilizing muscles, not just the prime mover. And as a result, they get stronger to allow you to do what you want to do. Now, one way that
Mhm.
I used to incorporate this was if I was work primarily in the strength field, but if I was working with someone on squats and they started to kind of hit a plateau on their squats, we would move to like a leg press machine that added a ton of stability to the lift, which allowed them then to really focus on the prime movers and get them even stronger, then move them back to a squat, but something more like a front squat, where the weights were much lower, but the stability was a lot higher. Get that developed, then go back to the back squat, and they would just be surprised at the fact that they just added like 5 to 10% to their squat without doing squats.
Mhm.
And so it's understanding how the prime movers do the main work. The stabilizers need to do their work, but you can't let them hold you back or you can't leave them behind. You have to kind of pay attention to how those are working and where they are relative, or you risk injury or you risk not getting stronger if that was the intent, which again, for strength training was what I was doing and kind of my protocol for if someone got to a point where they were not able to squat a particular weight. I knew they were stronger than that. They just they weren't able to do it because they didn't feel confident in the stabilization. Put them under load on a leg press, and suddenly they're leg pressing twice what they could squat. And then when you go back to stabilization, get that up to speed, then back to the squat, that the strength curve continued.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think like there's other factors in there as well as it's important to rotate through, different modalities of training because we don't want your strength and size, like we don't want your strength and size to exceed your ability to stabilize. Because even though those machines are providing external stability, it's not like your serratus or the muscle that stabilizes your shoulder blade under your armpit when you're pressing doesn't have to work in a chest press, right? Um, and I will say that like if your goal is primary overall muscular development, then machines. You should, over a 12-week period, I want to gain as much muscle as I possibly can. You want to use machines because you want to really isolate down on that muscle. And machines are safe to take your intensity levels extremely high without increasing the risk of injury. Like you can go pretty close to failure on a leg press, especially say on a leg extension, but you don't want to go there on a squat because that's a bad day waiting to happen, right?
Well, it's like, yeah, I've seen people on chest press, and you can't do the last rep. You set the weights down, no harm, no foul. You're doing the bench press by yourself, and you get to failure. Um, you're necking that bar.
Right.
So yeah, there's definitely something to be said for incorporating the use of machines as a function of building muscle. It's not as functional because you don't have the stabilization that's required to be able to do that if you were doing it with a bar. So don't translate one to the other. Um, I tell people that all the time. I'm like, just because you can leg press a certain amount of weight, uh, don't think that means you should put that on a squat bar and think it's going to
Right.
work the exact same way because it just won't. Um, that same thing with me. People are using a bar, and I've had to tell them before because they're training at home. I'm like, okay, you're currently doing 135 pounds on a bar. Do not just go grab 260s and think you can do dumbbells at 60 pounds. It's an entirely different thing because the stabilization isn't there, and you're
Mhm.
likely to be kissing one of those dumbbells as much as you are likely to be pressing them. So,
Yeah. I generally found a pretty good rule of thumb with clients when I was training them in person, which I do less of now. I still train 3 people or so in person throughout the course of the week just because I really do love it. But I found like on a bench press, for example, it's like if you got 45 pounds on each end of the bench press bar, you're probably safe bench pressing 45-pound dumbbells. Take the bar away. What's your weight on the end of the bar? That's probably a good rule of thumb in and around the same rep range
yeah.
with your
And so,
dumbbells,
yeah,
right?
the math on that would generally work out because the bar's roughly probably 45 pounds. So you're 45, 45, 45. Basically, if you take 1/3 of your total bench press weight, that's your dumbbell. You got two of
Yeah.
those, so you're basically doing 2/3 of the total bench press weight. That's reasonable to start. You might find that you're not quite there, depending on where the stabilization is. This is a very uncomfortable lift if you're not stable. But once you kind of get that stability in, you'll see that strength increase pretty quickly.
Absolutely. And I think just kind of like kicking the ball around a little bit and just chatting a little bit. I think something that like people like there's certain tools in the gym that are specific tools for specific intentions. So, and certain exercises in the gym are very skill based, and then other exercises are very like recruitment based, where we're really pushing the capability because it's safe, i.e., on a machine. But like, don't go into the gym and think that because you have a training partner with you, you're trying to grow as much muscle as possible and you're on a bench press and you need to take the bench press to failure or beyond where you're really not sure if you're going to hit that lift and your form goes to HE double hockey sticks. And because now what you're doing is you're just reinforcing a really bad pattern of that exercise and increasing your risk of injury. Like I think there's pros and bros, and pros never ever ever have their clients approaching failure on barbell exercises. And bros are like, come on, you got one more rep. Let's see you squirm and do it horribly. You
Yeah,
know what I mean?
let's
Like,
not. Yeah, let's not.
yeah,
Nothing wrong with being excitable and enjoying yourself, and have hooping and hollering a little bit, but let's not. Okay, we're over 40. We can't train that way consistently, so there's no reason to train like that much at all.
and
So
let's just
Tom,
pick the right tool. Let's just pick the
yeah,
right tool for that, you know?
yeah.
Yeah.
So Tom, I define wellness as being the healthiest, fittest, and happiest you can be. What are three strategies or tactics to get and stay well?
I love that question. So, three tactics. So, I would say the three most powerful things that I would probably look at would be regulate your sleep. And in my opinion, the best way to do that is go to bed and wake up every single day at the same time. I have two things that I'm going to combine as one, but
Okay,
it's
fair
basically
enough.
like we'll call it routine so I can sneakily make it one. Routine of have a morning routine and have an evening routine. Something that I like to do in the morning is I fill up my cup in the morning. So I do things, something that is, I feel is for me. So I start my day off, I wake up, I start my day off fairly slow. I fill up my cup, I listen to things that fill me up. At the end of my day, I do something called letting down my guard, where I visually clear up my day and let go of that day before I go need to be present somewhere else. Because I think we're living in a day and age where we just are always getting pulled in these different directions. And if you're full, you can tackle your day. But if you start your day empty, you're going to have anxiety and stress and yada, yada, yada. And then let down your guard at the end of the day. And then I would say, work on health. And I'm going to be sneaky here because physical and mental health, right? So,
Yeah,
um, train often and always work on personal development. Those are the three pillars, if I could prioritize three, that I would say.
perfect. Okay, so Tom, if someone wants to learn more about you and what you're doing there as Tom the trainer, where would you like for me to send them?
Yeah, for sure. So I do have I got a lot of different social avenues. Instagram is Tom the Trainer Fitness. On Facebook is Tom Mouland, my name. I'm also Tom Mouland on LinkedIn. And then my podcast is Tom the Trainer Fitness. And your listeners will have the luxury of hearing you talk about some things on the podcast as well coming up also. So those would be the areas to find me. If you have all those locations, I do recommend that you follow on all, just because we got to rely on the algorithms to provide us with the information that we want to see. So if you are following more than one, it's more likely that you'll get the information about optimizing training in your 40s.
Right. So you go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/676, and I'll have the links there to Tom's social media, his podcast, and the lot. So, Tom, thank you so much for being on 40 Plus Fitness.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Welcome back, Raz.
Hey, Ellen. Wow. First of all, that was a super in-depth conversation with Tom the trainer. It sounds like he knows what he's doing as far as weightlifting, resistance training in the gym. I appreciate all of his incredible knowledge. There's a lot to learn from there.
Yeah. I think the key is this. You're going to find yourself in one of a few different buckets when you get into resistance training. You're either the beginner who is just getting started, or you're the beginner that wants to stay at kind of that cool level of I can do this amount of work and I can stay strong. And if I want to specialize and do something a little bit more, add a little bit more muscle or a little bit of that I can do that. But I don't have to get into all of the complexities of all of these things. And then there's the intermediate level where someone says, okay, I don't want the dad bod, if you will. I don't want to look, I want to change the way I look. So I'm going to really be working to change my physique. And to do that, I am going to have to do a little bit more complex, a little bit more volume. And this is the way that you can maximize that volume. So you're not just doing more, but you're doing it in a way that your body has to adapt, has to get stronger, has to get bigger, because you keep changing it up in a way that is scientifically proven and solid to make that happen. So that's the intermediate level person. And then then there's the advanced person. It's like, okay, now I'm going to either compete or I'm going to be on magazine covers or that type of thing. And so then that's an even higher level of complexity.
For sure.
And so you kind of heard us talking through the intermediate and advanced level stuff. And for a lot of people, totally not relevant to what you want to accomplish, but just knowing that it's there and that's the way you get there. So it's available to us. Or over 40. We're not going to be Arnold Schwarzenegger style people. That's, not going to happen like the Hulk. Those types of things aren't going to happen for us. But if you want to continue to progress your physique, and again, there's nothing wrong. I'm 100%. If you're interested in having this physique where when you take off your shirt, everybody is like, hey, Grandpa, that's awesome. Or hey, Grandma, that's awesome.
Jeez.
Okay. Well, no, again, there's nothing wrong with it. So people think that this wanting to be attractive, wanting to be sexy, wanting these attributes to be this way is not, that it goes away. Not always, no. Okay. Most of us still want the same things we wanted when we were in our 20s.
Sure.
So guys want bigger arms. Guys want, bigger chests, smaller waist. We want those things. The V taper, all those things are still things that we kind of want. And I would just say that if you get yourself into a good base of shape and you're thinking you want to take your physique to the next level, you are going to have to get a little bit more intense and a little bit more involved in putting it all together as a program to make that happen. It's not just doing more of what you've been doing that gets you more in the game of physique and muscle mass and strength. You have to do things different, and you have to do them sometimes better to make that happen. But for, yes, the vast majority of people, this is not what you need to know to go into the gym. A basic program that you run over week after week, in general, will probably keep you moving forward for most of your life. If you're focused in doing the work, you don't necessarily have to go to this level, but if you are interested in going to the next level, you got some things to learn.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that was my big takeaway from your discussion with Tom is that I'm an amateur in the gym. I just do enough to get some strength. I see a little bit of muscle definition, but I'm just in there just to do my thing so I can be a stronger runner. But with expertise like yours and Tom's, I could easily take that to the next level. And I guess that was kind of the takeaway is that when you are ready to go to whatever that next level is, whether it's beginner to intermediate or intermediate to more experienced, it's best to talk to somebody who's experienced like yourself or Tom.
Yeah.
You guys have more unique knowledge.
Yeah. So if you go in and you're thinking 2025 is the year I am most fit I've ever been, then yeah, it's going to take a little bit more than a full body workout twice a week and just progressing from there. It is going to have to be a little bit more staggered, a little bit more complex. You are going to have to periodize. You are going to have to do some of these other things to continue to see that growth and that change. So if that is your thing, then by all means reach out. But if you're just saying, I want to get stronger, I want to feel better, you don't have to go to these extremes.
Absolutely. It was an interesting discussion. There's a lot of science to it for sure.
It's definitely, and that's one of the kind of the interesting things is that back in the day, and this was every study, they tended to focus on young people because they were in college. So here's a professor needs to write a paper. He goes out and picks 15 college age kids who've been doing a little bit of lifting in the gym and says, hey, how'd you like to get into a study where you'll probably be able to add an additional 10 to 15 pounds of muscle over the next year? All the boys are raising their hand and boom, they go do a study. And then it says, okay, these guys did this, these guys did that. These guys added 7 pounds of muscle mass. These guys added 10. So do this. That's how the science worked. They never really sat down and said, well, what if they're 40?
Yeah.
What if they're 50? There's a lot more of that kind of study happening now. But there's a lot of people in this field. So there's a lot of study that goes on. And, the amount of mass that you put on when you're lifting, muscle mass you put on when you're lifting, well, that's finite. This is measurable. They do a DEXA scan and say, okay, these guys had this much average muscle mass. Here's their average age. Here's the program we put them through. This is how much mass they added. So the science is pretty clear on most of it, of what you need to do these things. But it's funny because it's like a lot of the bro science stuff from the past, they just inherently figured this stuff out without the studies. And then the studies come in and say, yes, this is how it works. But at the same time, there is a lot of bro science out there that is not the best and not absolutely certain and true.
Yeah.
And, it's percentages of percentages in some cases where it's not really what they would say in a study is significant. But significant is in the eye of the beholder.
Sure.
If someone knows they're going to get 0.25% advantage by doing a thing, they're going to do that thing. So they talk about eating windows or they talk about other things. Yes, if you're really trying to add muscle and the difference of 1% or 0.25% matters in your field, then you want to do that.
Sure.
When you look at how, like you look at anything where you have exceptional people and the difference between number 1 and number 2 is so finite.
Very.
That matters versus, okay, you can pick up your grandkid and you can also pick up your grandkid. Which one's better? Well, they're both great.
Yeah.
Okay,
It-
so there's no winning at that. There's no
True.
slightly better at picking up your grandkid competition.
Hmm.
You didn't hurt yourself. You
Well,
enjoyed your
there's
time with that
important.
grandkid.
Yes.
There's the win. Okay,
Hmm.
but again, that quarter of a percent difference doesn't really matter. So don't be thinking I got to boil the ocean with this. I got to do this. And,
Right.
I was talking to one potential client, and he's like, "What do you think about?" What do you think about doing like eating a whole lot, kind of bulking
Hmm.
and then cutting?
Oh.
And so this is a standard for bodybuilders. It's easier to put on mass if you're focused on mass, and it's
Hmm.
easier to lose fat if you're focused on losing fat. You can do both at the same time, but you're not optimized in either one. So that's why bodybuilders do what they do. They
Hmm.
optimize for mass and they work really hard and take a few things, and then they put on a whole bunch of muscle, and
Hmm.
then they will sit there and say, okay, now I'm going to do this low grade cardio. I'm not going to eat much, and I will lose fat down to a point, and that's how they'll get ready for a competition.
Mm.
But for most of us, we're
Yeah.
not bodybuilders.
Right. And
We're
not
not
in
getting paid to
competition.
do these things, and it's not the healthiest thing to do is to gain a whole bunch
Hmm.
of weight and then lose a whole bunch of weight.
Hmm.
And when we're older, we don't have everything in place to make sure that that cutting and building works the way we want to. So for
Hmm.
most people that don't do it the right way or are too old and don't really pay attention, all they're doing is losing muscle mass when they lose weight and gaining fat when they try to add mass. They're not
Hmm.
adding the right kind of mass. They're not training hard enough. So they're not where they need to be. And so it doesn't work. So anyone over the age of 40 that wants to do a bulk and cut,
Mm.
bad idea. Just a bad idea. You should never be doing a bulk at all.
Hmm.
And if you want to say you're doing a cut, it's not like what a bodybuilder does. It's
Mm.
nothing like it. You're not going to do that. You won't do that. You almost can't do that
Yeah.
because it's miserable. And no one's going to put themselves through that just for the sake of looking a certain way unless they're going to get paid for it or in a competition to do it or there's some dysfunction there
Sure.
in their brain.
Yeah.
I only say all that because, yes, we can get more and more finite on all of these things,
Hmm.
but the amount of value you're getting out of it is small. If you stick to the basics, you resistance train, you eat well,
Hmm.
your body's going to respond by keeping you strong, helping you hold on to muscle mass. And in the end, that's winning.
That's perfect. Yep. Just perfect.
All right. Well, I will talk to you next week.
Great. Take care, Ellen.
You too. Bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.
If you enjoyed today's show, take a moment to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And if you would, please leave us a rating and review on your podcast player of choice. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, on our Christmas week episode, we discuss the best gift you've ever gotten. Until then, have a happy and healthy week.